Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Biblio Files, a show from the Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan that's all about books. Each episode, we spend a few minutes talking about a book on a certain theme that we've picked in advance. And this time, we're talking about dystopian novels. So it's going to be a good one. And also, I have to say, this is our 100th episode, so I'm really excited. I'm Christopher, and I'm here as always with Amanda and Lucy. And let's dive into our dystopian novels. Amanda, what did you read this time?
All right. So I am very excited that it's our 100th episode, and I'm being very calm, cool, and collected, even though I'm like so excited and bursting inside. So we did it, 100. The world didn't end, or did it? So the novel that I chose for today is called Leave the World Behind by Verman Alam. I don't read a lot of dystopian. I know I discussed one series for here, and I've read like Hunger Games, but I don't really gravitate towards it for casual reading. So when I was trying to find a book, I came upon this one. This book was published in 2020. It's the third novel for the author, and he was actually nominated for a National Book Award for it, which is pretty cool. And it's actually being produced and made into a movie that'll be out later this year. So this book will leave the world behind. It centers on a couple of families. There's a family, there's a mom and a dad, Clay and Amanda, and they have two teenage children, and they are leaving their home in Brooklyn. They're heading to Long Island for a long weekend. They rented this luxury Airbnb. They're excited just to get away and relax. There's a lot of that going on at the beginning. And then while they are there enjoying their rental home, there's a knock at the door. And they get the door, and there's an older couple that are there, and they answer it. And they claim that there is a blackout on the northeastern side of the country, and that they're actually the owners of the home that these other people are renting, and they would like to come and retreat and stay in their own home. And the couple who are there, they're like, what's going on? Amanda and Clay are white, this other couple is black. And so that little bit of that racial like comes into play about, why are these people here? Do they actually own this home? Are they lying? Is this a scam? They mentioned that movie 6 Degrees of Separation, which I thought was in my brain, that kind of, I had a moment of that. So that was kind of interesting that they mentioned that. So eventually they do decide to let this couple come in and stay in their own home. And so you've got these two couples, these two teenagers, and they find out that the couple who own the home, they're wealthier, they're very well educated, they've got grown children. And so it's sort of like this slow burn of this conversation of these two families who don't know each other at all, who are now sort of like trapped in this home. And the couple who are renting the home still don't quite know what's going on in the outside world. No one has any cell phone service. There's no satellite. There's no television. So they can't really check what's actually going on to see if this other couple who own the home, if their story is true. So it's just kind of this conversation of them hanging out, and you don't really know what's going on outside the home. Eventually, there is this loud noise that happens that kind of alerts them. They start seeing strange things with wildlife around the home, but it's still just them in the home. They're making dinner, they're having vodka cocktails, they're going in the hot tub, and then other strange things start happening. And so as the reader, it's sort of the slow burn of like tension. It's not even super I mean, I guess it is suspenseful, and there is tension, but it's not fast paced like you would expect from like your typical quote unquote dystopian novel that's more futuristic. But in here, there's like something that's happening. But as the reader, you don't quite know what's happening along with the characters in the book. But there is this omniscient voice that kind of gives you little bits and pieces of, well, actually, this was happening unbeknownst to our characters. This was going on, although they didn't know it. So you do, as the reader, you do know something larger is happening, but you don't know what is causing all these things. And the families in this home don't know what's happening either. So it's pretty interesting. I finished reading this like after we had the big power outage on the west side of Ann Arbor, so it's kind of neat reading about that. And plus, this was published in 2020, and we all have gone through a global pandemic at this point. So this is a really cool book for people who aren't even into dystopian, who don't want that futuristic reality. You know, it's like 2075. We're all like, you know, whatever futuristic things you could add about like food and transportation and housing. That's not in this book yet. Where I could see something like, you know, I want to see like, you know, 50 years later than this book to see what things are like. but we're not there yet. This is just the trickle. So it's for me, it was really cool. It was just over 200 pages. I actually listened to it on audio on Libby. It was like just over 7 hours. It was a nice listen. I enjoyed the narrator. And for me, the focus was not just on this intense dystopian situation. It was more on the characters and the people, and makes you internalize also, like, who would you go to? Who do you trust? How do you get information to find out what's happening when there is no larger form of communication, like within the area you're living in, or the city or the state or the country or the world? So for me, it was kind of cool. It's kind of sort of survivalist, but not necessarily, because, they're enjoying like steaks and vodka. But I really enjoyed the book. I don't remember how I found out about it. I think I was looking up like new dystopian novels to read. And this one, I wouldn't even call it dystopian light. I don't even know how I would classify it, but there definitely is an element of this unknown, unexpected, looming threat thing happening. And you have these two families who are trying to interact and make decisions independently and together, and learning to trust or not trust each other, while all these random weird things are happening to your family and outside of the home. So I really enjoyed it. And that is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. Lucy, what dystopian treasure did you bring for us today?
I will tell you in a second, but I read that book, Leave the World Behind. I got an early copy of it. So I read it earlier in 2020, and it was like so weird to read that. It would just, you bring up an interesting point, like dystopian likes. I was thinking a lot when I was picking a book, like what makes a book dystopian? And is there a difference between like speculative fiction and dystopia? I mean, technically, like a dystopia is the opposite of a utopia, right? But we've sort of created this more of a blanket term. And then I started to think about like, why is it so popular? And it's interesting because you look at, it's like either a cautionary tale, right? Or it's like speculation about how things could be, or are people reading it because we aren't there and they feel good about that? There's like so many, or are we drawn towards like disasters? There's just so many interesting things to think about. So I actually had a hard time picking. I read a couple, but the one that I picked was called Gold Fame Citrus by Claire V. Watkins. And I've just got to show you, this is the AFAX bookmark look how well that matches the cover. Sorry. So this was written in 2015, and I've had it on my shelf for a while. And so I was excited to read it. I'm going to read you the first line because it's a really good first line. Sorry, I'm just enthusiastic about it. Punting the prairie dog into the library was a mistake. So that is what it sounds like kicking a prairie dog with a boot into the library. So that's how the book starts. That was a woman named Luz who was kicking the prairie dog into the library. And the book is about Luz and her boyfriend, Ray, and it starts in California. California at this point is like completely arid, broken. All the universities have shut down, all the schools, nothing's happening because there's been a drought for so long. And in addition to the drought, there are these really, really strong winds that have created this thing called the Amargosa Dune Sea. So it is basically ocean size, but made of sand. And it's kind of making its way towards Los Angeles. What it has done is like everywhere where it's passed, it's kind of eaten up that territory. And so a lot of the world is like under this sand ocean. It's coming towards LA. So the only people who are still in California are kind of, like people who are daring, people who have nowhere else to go, maybe who have a criminal background and can't travel easily. But Luz and Ray are camping out in this starlet's home in Laurel Canyon, because she's abandoned it. And Luz just likes to dress up in her clothes and like punt prairie dogs into the library. And her boyfriend kind of takes care of all the survival stuff. They have no water to drink, so they drink something called ration cola, which is like probably just a can of soda. So they go down to this bonfire where it's like everyone kind of collects, and they end up coming back from that bonfire with a child that gets left behind, and they kind of are drawn to her. They call her Egg because she says egg all the time. So they decide now they have a child, they have to leave Los Angeles. but you can't really do that. You have to get papers to go to like the Pacific Northwest. Ray has he went AWOL from the military, so he can't really travel easily. So they go to this person who can kind of help give them a car, and they get a car, and they start this journey with Egg, and it's sort of fraught. They're trying to drive through a drought and sand, and anyway, they are headed actually away from Los Angeles, but towards this sand dune sea, and they get split up. And what happens is Luz ends up going there, and it's been rumored that nobody can survive there. It's basically a big land of sand, and then there are these rumors, though, that there is this one community there that lives in this lifeless sand dune, and they're kind of this wandering group of nomads that are led by he's very charismatic, the leader, named Levi, but you could see how it sort of is actually this cult thing. He's a dowser, so he can find water, but he can also find bodies buried underneath sand and other things. And Luz goes there, and she and Egg get taken care of, but she also starts to realize like all the people who live there are really, really unusually devoted to Levi and to the place where she's living. And there's this theory that they all live there because they all got pulled there by these bigger forces. And so in addition to having this world that's sort of like ending, but also ending in a way that like you read this book, you turn on the news, you think about the heat right now, and you know that it's like speculative almost, because what would happen if there were no water? Then you also have this like kind of cult-ish aspect to it, which is very interesting. He's kind of like, he fancies himself a prophet, the guy who leads this. So there's that whole interesting, weird part of the story. And I'm not going to give away any more about if they get reunited, Ray and Luz, or whatever happens. But it's beautifully written. I've never read anything by Claire Bay Watkins. And so it was really sort of like mesmerizing at parts, very funny at parts. Like there's a whole description of the TV shows that people are watching in prison at the time, like reality shows, but it'll be like, there's like a reality show about undertakers, or it's just like the things that have happened, like custody battle, spy in the subdivision, it's really a murder bride. It's that taking what we watch on TV now and making it even worse. So there's aspects that made me laugh as well. And as a person, she's very interesting. Her father was Paul Watkins, who was Charles Manson's right-hand man. And she kind of grew up in this like, removed area and community in California. So it's interesting to think about what pieces of her might be in this book. When she wrote this book, she was a assistant professor at U of M. She no longer is, but she's written another novel since then that I really want to read, and some short stories as well. So that was sort of all over the place, but there's a lot in this book, which is Gold Fame Citrus by Claire Bay Watkins. Oh, and the Gold Fame Citrus is because they're talking about like, why would anyone ever go to California? And there are only 3 things people ever went to California for, right? Gold, fame, or citrus. So that's what that comes from. And that is my dystopian novel or speculative novel. I don't really know. Christopher, what did you pick?
Well, these both sound great. My book is quite a bit different and possibly the most grim. Interestingly, it satisfies dystopian fiction for this episode, women in translation for the next episode, and Latina authors for the episode after that. I guess I was feeling kind of spiteful when I chose this book, but it was recommended by a friend of mine, and it is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. So I guess I should warn people that this is possibly a graphic discussion of upsetting topics. So if you think you might be upset by cannibalism, this would be a good time to stop watching this episode. The book is a very, very fast read. It's divided into two parts. Really, the first part is an introduction to a not even really future society. It's really just an alternative society, alternative universe where people are eating special meat, which means humans. Animals have all been destroyed except for some birds, and there may be a kind of a conspiracy at work here, but the book goes into long detail about Marcos and his work at the processing plant and his visits to the butcher shop and to the tannery and to the breeding centers and to the scientific research centers, all of which involve humans. And so some humans have been treated as a head, they're called, like a head of cattle, and it's all for eating. And people get this special meat, as it's called, and they eat it. And I think it's fascinating how people can be dehumanized. So there have been some critics of the book that say this is so unrealistic. How could society go from one moment, treating people as people, and the next moment eating them? And I find it totally believable. It's so easy for individuals and for societies as a whole to just switch over to another way of thinking, especially when everyone around them is doing something and when the government says it's okay. That's the first half of the book. I'm not going to get into too much of the second half because things take an even darker, more dire, upsetting turn. But the book isn't just about cannibalism. It's also the story of Marcos, and he's remembering his sweet childhood with his parents. He's taking care of his aging father, and he's thinking about his little son who died. So there's this other aspect to it, and you're really kind of rooting for Marcos, even though he works at a processing plant, and he's becoming more and more disenchanted and skeptical of this entire system that he's a part of. I think I just want to leave it there because things build up very quickly. As I said, they become even darker, and it has quite an upsetting ending as well. So that is that is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. I don't know if either of you have heard of this book or run across it. As I said, it is a surprisingly fast read for as dark of a subject as it is. So, does anyone have
heard of it? I didn't really know that it was like that's where it went. Now I'm fascinated, and I think I need to read it.
Well,
but then I'm also like, I don't know.
Yeah, I will say, it would not surprise me in the least if someone was nauseated to the point of throwing up in this book while reading it, because it is, it's kind of like The Jungle, right? Only with human bodies. And so it's very graphic and upsetting.
Yeah. I'm the person, I couldn't watch the second season of Yellow Jackets because that's when they were really going to start to get into it. So maybe this is not the book for me. But
it may not be.
It sounds really good.
It's definitely not for everyone, but I found so much to think about and discuss in this book, including the role of religion, government, media, society, so much. And it was about 200 pages. So, yeah.
200. When you held it up, it looked a lot thicker. For some reason, I was picturing it like over 400.
Yeah, it's so fast. I read it in just 2 short settings. So,
Well, and I think too, if you think about like, quote unquote, like dystopian literature or novels, it's sort of like it is this fear of the unknown of like anything happening at any time. And you don't know what, like you were saying, Christopher, like that people are going to do, the government's going to do, is society going to collapse? Do they prevail? Is there like a period of nothing and then something? Like it's this unknown, but there's also this, it's scary to think about. And that's not quite why I'm not super into reading dystopian, because there's definitely more fun ways to do it or gross ways to do it. But it's this, you don't know, anything could happen at any time. And I feel like some of the things that have happened over the past, 3 years, it kind of, I found myself saying multiple times, like, wow, it feels like we're living in like dystopian reality. Not really. It's just scarier and harder. And we've had more things to overcome and survive and figure out, or see happening in other parts of the world. It's interesting. It's fascinating. And I can see why it would be scary, whether or not there were like, people eating other people. It's just this unknown, it's fascinating. It's interesting. It's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I've read a couple different like dystopian books where really all of the animals are gone in the world because that's something that we've done. So, I mean, that's not necessarily a big leap to go from that to what happens in the book that you're talking about. And again, I think it like reminds me, it makes me think about like why are we drawn to dystopian novels? And is it because like, does it sort of like assuage anxiety a little bit because you're like, well, that is, if you can imagine the worst, maybe it won't happen. Like there's that mindset. But then it's also like, let's be warned. I mean, there's just so many reasons why people are drawn to it, I think. But this planning for this episode really got me thinking about the role that it plays and why it's so popular. And it's just, there's a lot to think about. So.
Yeah. Well, so if you think about it, like if you look at any sort of like genre fiction, like fantasy, like why are people gravitated towards reading about fantasy? Or if you look at some sort of dystopian that goes to like the zombie lens of like The Last of Us, or World War Z, or things like that, that's like, can be futuristic, and that's what results from sort of like this dystopian thing that's happened. So it's interesting. It's interesting. But as humans also, we are complex beings,
Yeah.
It's a real fun. It's called not a downer, but when we were listening to our episodes and we're like, oh, episode 100, dystopian. Is that weird? Is that good? I'm like, let's just see what happens. Like, what does it mean? So that's just the way the math worked out, but it's kind of fun.
That's right.
Yeah, we're survivors. We've survived 9 episodes.
True.
Well, as always, we would love to know what you're reading, including any dystopian novels. That would be great. You can leave a post in the link below. And until next time, happy reading.